both of the Timothys and Titus are written to what you might call church planters.
Yeah.
These are personal letters of advice written from a mentor to a mentee who is assigned a particular region, supposed to set up fellowships in that region. And we know from Acts 20, I think was it Acts 20? Did I get the right chapter? I thought it was Acts 20. Somewhere in that area in Acts, Paul is in Ephesus after these letters were written. This was right before he went to Jerusalem. He came to visit, check on Timothy and how the progress was going. And he called all the elders from the various fellowships together. So he did the same thing in Rome after his arrest. So they weren't setting up the church of Ephesus or the church of Rome. They were setting up the fellowships, plural, of Ephesus and Rome. And Timothy was acting kind of what we would call a bishop, where he was in that region. He was setting up home fellowships and helping them get started and appointing elders. And this was essentially like, the idea that we've talked of a network of home fellowships, but it was focused on a metropolitan area. So in our context, we'd say, the Church of Houston, but really that's an assembly of assemblies. What Jason calls a church of house churches, but the English words kind of muddle things up a little bit because we get the wrong impression from the word church. But it was the assembly of the assemblies. This is what Paul called together when he visited Ephesus. Yeah, at the ecclesia of ecclesias, or whatever the plural of that would be in Greek. So reading Timothy and Titus from that perspective, you get a whole different idea of what Paul was talking about. Whereas like his letters to Rome and Corinth, these were also letters of advice, but they were letters to, this whole regional group of fellowships. Yeah. And these are specifically to individuals who are appointing elders and setting up congregations. So I think reading it with that in mind, Paul is saying things that might be more controversial at times with the assumption that we've already had this conversation. I'm just kind of reminding you of a few things, that sort of approach. So you can't take a lot of what Paul is saying in sound bites. Well, you can't do that with any of his letters. But I think that's probably even more so with Timothy and Titus because it was a very narrow audience.
Yeah, it would have been a very narrow audience if you think about it that way, because it's you're a leader, and this is what you're here to do. So there's a specific mission,
mm-hmm.
and it's like, so here are things you need to keep in mind, and part of that is like you need to keep these things in mind and do these things, because if you're going to be seen as an authority,
mm-hmm.
like if you want people to see you as an authority, then you have to be above reproach.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that like you are living what you're preaching.
Well, and it's not just whether you want to be seen as an authority; you have to be.
Yeah.
And this is something that I have always struggled with. I don't want people thinking of me as an authority, but here I am, and I'm an elder of a fellowship, and Brad too. And whether I like it or not, this letter was written to people in that position. And so he gives advice about some things that I'm not real comfortable with. Like he says that, command and teach these things. I'm not comfortable commanding people to do anything. But there are times like earlier when, you and Jenny were both talking, and I'm sure you had great things to say, but nobody was going to learn anything from it because it was just two people talking at once. So I interrupted, and that was just instinct. That wasn't like me commanding and teaching. It was just,
sure.
But at some level, if you're going to be an elder in a fellowship, you have to accept that there are times when you have to command and teach. And I'm not comfortable doing that, but it has to be done. So I have to get comfortable with it. And there's a balance that has to be struck in these kind of things where you have to be willing to exercise authority, but you also have to be very careful not to exercise more authority than is warranted. You don't go bossing people around just because you disagree with them or you don't like them or anything like that. Yeah. You are there to protect and care for people, not to be their boss.
And an elder still has to be teachable and
mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, you have to, before you can be an authority, you have to be willing to be under authority. And if you're not willing to listen to anybody, you have no business telling anybody else what to do either. Now, the challenge in our circumstance is finding the people who are qualified to be the leaders of the leaders. And, we look all over the place and look too closely and people disappoint you. And that's unavoidable. People are people and we're not going to turn them into angels.
Well, and a lot of people that have been hurt and left the Sunday church and all that kind of stuff, like, they don't want to be led anymore because they're afraid to fall into the trap of like being misled. And so then they can't be led anymore. And like, it's a difficult position that I think a lot of people are in. But I think we have to find the way to heal from those things so we can actually, one, be led by the Spirit of God, but two, have order in our midst. And it's not the people that I seem to have observed in my lifetime who are qualified to lead are often, not always, but often people who are not ambitious to lead. Because what I have seen is that the ones
people
who are the
want
most
to be in charge
and want to be in charge are often some of the most dangerous people to be around. But those that are reluctant to lead but will lead anyway because they know their responsibility often are people who are more qualified. And I don't know why that's the case except for pride and humility.
Ego, I was going to say ego's out of the way.
But that's what I've seen. And there, I think it takes discernment to kind of know the difference between what those two are, but it is an important thing.
I think looking at Paul is instructive in finding that balance in leaders, because Paul comes across as being pretty bossy. I mean, he's commanding, he's authoritative, he calls people names, he calls people out, and he creates conflict. But what was the first thing he did after he came to faith in Yeshua? He went and he submitted himself to James and Peter, especially James. I don't know what James did for a living, probably a handyman, just like Yeshua and Joseph. Peter was a fisherman. Well, Paul was this scholar from a wealthy family, politically and religiously connected.
Yeah, culturally that would have been.
And he went and he submitted himself to these two country hicks from Galilee. This is the thing that Yeshua talked about with his disciples. The ones who will be first have to put themselves last. You all have to be submitted to each other. And Paul talked about that in Ephesians too, the idea of mutual submission to the whole congregation, which doesn't mean that nobody's in charge, but it does mean that at some level, everybody has to be submitted to somebody and you put the needs of others ahead of your own. And and you think reading Paul's letters that nobody's in charge of Paul. I mean, he rebukes Peter right to his face, but then he turns around on spiritual matters and submits himself to Peter at the same time.